Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Catch Up with Cancer Movement webinar series from Erwin Mitchell. So tonight we're going to be talking specifically about cancer screening. So before we go any further, just a few housekeeping issues. First of all, you can submit your questions during the session via the Q&A function, which you'll see on your screen. We're planning to deal with all of those questions at the end. When you do submit your questions, please include your name and your email address. So if we don't get to your question, we can respond to you directly after the event. We're going to make a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides will be sent out afterwards. And towards the end of the session, we'll be posting a feedback link. So please just take a couple of minutes to let us know your feedback. So tonight, joining me on the panel, first of all, me. I'm a partner at Erwin Mitchell, based in our Bristol office. We've also got Rachel Avery, who's the Director of Marketing and Communications at Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation, and Morgan McMahon, who is the Head of Nursing at InHealth. So I'm going to kick things off today, just talk to you about my experience, which is really coming from a couple of angles. Firstly is my experience as a medical negligence solicitor, where I have a couple of decades experience of acting for claimants who've experienced delays in diagnosis of their cancer. And obviously that can impact the outcome for them, both in terms of the treatment that they require, but also sometimes their life expectancy as well. But also I'm going to speak about my recent experience of being diagnosed with breast cancer. So the cases that I've seen during my career are mostly delays in primary care, actually, where clients have attended, perhaps displaying symptoms, but there's been a failure to refer on for further investigation. In these cases, the diagnosis ends up being made further down the line when the cancer has progressed, and obviously prognosis is probably worsened by that point. Sometimes this can mean that more aggressive treatment is needed, perhaps surgery would have been avoided, or perhaps chemotherapy. And in the worst cases, I see cancer which would have been treatable subsequently becomes terminal. And although that's not what this webinar is about this evening, clearly there's a similarity in that we're talking about the importance of making an early diagnosis by screening to ensure the best possible outcome. So that leads me to my own experience. So this all began for me not so long ago, actually, back in December 22, when I had a letter inviting me for a mammogram as part of the National Breast Screening Programme. Actually, I was going away for Christmas. I didn't think too much about it. I was fit. I regularly examined my breasts. So I left making the appointment until early in the new year and booked an appointment for early February. At that mammogram appointment, I was told that I'd get the results in about 3 weeks. So I was quite surprised actually to get a letter 4 days later inviting me to the breast clinic. But the letter was really clear that in 4% of cases, there was a false positive, so not to worry. So I figured I'm probably in that 4%. I went along to the clinic, I had an ultrasound, and they said they wanted to do a biopsy. Even then, actually, I was just thinking that biopsy would confirm that what they were seeing on the ultrasound scan was benign. And it's actually only when the breast cancer at the end of all of this offered me a cup of tea that I started to think that all probably wasn't well here. She explained to me at that point that they were almost certain by how the lump appeared on the ultrasound that this was a malignant lump, and that the biopsy was really about ascertaining the grade, which would determine the treatment plan. But she was really reassuring. The lump was relatively small. It was only 1.6 centimetres, so it was still stage 1. So I had the results of the biopsy a couple of weeks later, and that confirmed that this was a grade 3 cancer. So it was aggressive and fast growing, but also, again, positively, it was triple positive, which meant that the treatment could be highly targeted and very effective. So my treatment plan was that I was going to have chemotherapy first, followed by a mastectomy, because the MRI that I subsequently had revealed that the cancer was actually multifocal. There was a very small lump that hadn't been visible even on the mammogram. And then all of that would be followed by radiotherapy. No doubt about it, the chemo was horrible, but after 6 rounds, I had a further MRI which confirmed that there was no remaining evidence of disease. The chemo had actually destroyed all of the cancer cells that would be visible radiologically. The mastectomy pathology confirmed this, so the radiotherapy was just a real belt and braces approach. So all of my treatment was completed at the end of December. So again, relatively recently, but I am feeling much like my old self, and actually I'm running the Bristol 10K on Sunday, which is just over 12 months from when my chemotherapy began. So my point is that without the screening programme, I have no doubt that this would have been a very different picture. Firstly, I was feeling really well pre-diagnosis. I was fit and I was healthy. I had no symptoms at all. And importantly, from a breast cancer perspective, no evidence of any lump. Secondly, this was an aggressive grade 3 tumour. Although the lump was relatively small, it was already multifocal with another 0.7 millimetre lump and 2 lymph nodes involved. So if I hadn't had the mammogram when I did, I often wonder how large that lump would have been before I'd been able to feel it myself. And at the very least, whether this would have led to more lymph node involvement and where that would have gone from there. So it goes without saying, I'm a big supporter of the breast cancer screening programme and for encouraging as higher uptake as we possibly can. And although my experience is related to breast cancer, I think we'll hear from Rachel that the message is similar. We need screening to capture as many diagnoses as early as we possibly can to improve the outcomes from diagnosis of cancer. So over to Rachel Avery from the Roy Cancer Lung Cancer Foundation.
Thanks so much, Julie. So my name is Rachel Avery. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation, and I'm here to talk about lung cancer screening and the really positive impact it is starting to have on people with lung cancer. So to start, I just want to give a bit of a picture about the current lung cancer landscape, kind of a lung cancer by numbers, so to speak. Next slide, please. So lung cancer is the 3rd most common type of cancer in the UK. Every day, 133 people are given that devastating diagnosis that they have lung cancer. And sadly, over 34,000 people die of lung cancer each year, and that works out about 1 person every 15 minutes. So quite staggering. Next slide, please. To put that into context, lung cancer kills more people than breast, prostate and pancreatic cancers combined. And it actually kills more women than breast and ovarian cancers combined. And a lot of people are really shocked about that statistic in particular. Next slide. And in terms of survival, sadly, at the minute, only 4 out of 10 people will live for a year or more following a diagnosis. 3 out of every 20 will survive for 5 years or more, and just 1 out of every 10 people will survive for 10 years or more. So in short, it's a pretty bleak landscape for lung cancer at the moment, and that's a really depressing way to start any kind of presentation, so apologies for that, but I think it's really important that everyone understands what we're dealing with here when it comes to lung cancer. Next slide, please. So lung cancer is a disease that affects many people, and the primary reason for these awful statistics and poor survival rates is late diagnosis. Next slide. So around 3/4 of people who are diagnosed with lung cancer are diagnosed with late stage. So it's already metastasized, it's spread to other parts of their body, and curative treatment is no longer an option. And there's many contributing factors to late diagnosis, but typically it's because there aren't necessarily those really clear and obvious warning signs that something's wrong. And I think a lot of us would presume there was something as serious as lung cancer, we would expect the symptoms to marry up. They would be really severe, but in reality that isn't the case. There's no pain receptors in our lungs, so there isn't that trigger to set off those clear and obvious kind of alarm bells. Next slide, please. So symptoms instead are actually really, really subtle. They're hard to spot. They're easily dismissed as something else. So people don't seek the help as soon as we need them to. And in some cases, they aren't referred soon enough. You know, they present to primary care with symptoms, but they aren't necessarily sent for further tests or thorough investigation as soon as they possibly could be. They give them repeat antibiotics, and all that time it's just adding to the delays and giving the cancer chance to grow and to spread. And that's why, you know, we as a charity, Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation, has been campaigning for screening pretty much since we've existed, and that's 34 years. And thankfully, we are now in a position where all that work, all that research that we've funded has finally paid off, because as of June last year, we got the announcement that lung cancer screening was being given the green light, and it was going to be rolled out across the country. And the reason that we've campaigned so passionately, so fervently for screening is because we know it works. I said that, you know, we've funded a lot of research over the past 34 years, and most recently we've been working with the NHS on the rollout of targeted lung health checks. Next slide, please. So targeted lung health checks, what are they, and how are they different to screening? And I mean, to keep things simple, they're not. We just, at the time, we couldn't call them screening because a screening programme hadn't been agreed. But so basically, they aren't any different. Targeted lung health checks, they are basically pilot screening programmes. So they've been operating since about 2018, and gradually the programmes have just been rolled out in more and more areas across England. We're starting to see a pilot programme happen in Wales now as well. And this year we'll see the phase 4 programmes launch, and I think by the end of last year there was about 50 programmes operating in total, with at least one programme in each region of England. And how they work is people aged 55 to 74 who have ever smoked, and that's regardless of if they're still smoking or they quit 20, 30, 40 years ago. If it's on their medical record, they will receive an invitation or an appointment for an initial checkup. Prior to COVID, these were done face-to-face, but they actually switched to a telephone appointment, which actually works surprisingly well. So many of the programmes have actually kept this process in place, and it means they can do more appointments, and it's a bit more kind of less time consuming, and it's actually easier for people to have a call than physically go to an appointment. So at that appointment, people are asked a series of questions to determine their risk. And actually, the risk calculator actually stems from research that we funded kind of back in the day when the charity started. And those people that are meeting that risk are then invited for a CT scan, and that is done in either a mobile unit that kind of rocks up within the community, so in a supermarket car park or leisure centres, or it can be at the local hospital, but it's all about trying to make it as easy as possible for people to attend. And the outcomes are incredible. They are turning rates on their head. So remember, right at the beginning, I was talking about how depressing, you know, the lung cancer landscape was, but actually screening is starting to flip that. And here are the latest figures. Next slide, please. So at the end of last year, 3,332 people were diagnosed with lung cancer through these programmes, and 75%, so that 3/4, were early stage, so stages 1 and 2, when curative treatment is available. And remember, at the beginning of the presentation, I was talking about how many people were diagnosed at late stage. Next slide, please. That was 75%, 3/4. So it's literally turning these rates on their head. So we are starting to save a lot more people. That's a lot of numbers, and I don't like numbers. Didn't like numbers at school, still don't like numbers. I like those numbers, but I prefer talking about people. So let's put this into context and talk about some of the people that these checks are saving. I had wanted to show some video content, but I was warned that that actually is a bit of an issue sometimes on these things. So let me just tell you about Jeff. Next slide, please. So Jeff had lost several family members to lung cancer, including his mum. He's a cabbie from Salford. He's got a son and 3 grandchildren who are just the absolute apples of his eye. He had no symptoms when he got his letter. He went along anyway because of that family history, got diagnosed, had surgery, and went home the next day after surgery, straight home. And now he's back at the gym, he's back at work, and he's back being a granddad. Next slide, please. Then there's Joe. Joe was diagnosed just as COVID was kind of hitting the UK through the Liverpool programme. And just like Jeff, she had no symptoms, but went for her check because she knows how important these screening programmes are, just to make sure everything's all right. And to be fair, she got the shock of her life. She couldn't believe it when she received her diagnosis. We're actually members of the same gym, Joe and I used to bump into her all the time, and she's absolutely fine. She's fully recovered, and now she's actually just moved back up to Scotland to be near her daughter and this little one here, which is her first grandchild. So they're just 2 examples, and there are thousands more. And by the time a national programme is fully implemented in 2028, we're hoping up to 9,000 lives will be saved every single year. So that's 9,000 husbands, wives, mums, dad, brothers, you know, everyone we love, everyone, people that matter, people that are loved. And you know, that may not have been possible for the majority of them had it not been for screening. And yeah, it's great. You know, we're so proud of it. It's not all plain sailing. The programme is far from perfect, and I think one of the main challenges we face is actually getting people to attend. You know, Julie herself said she put off her appointment, and I think it is kind of human nature. So back at the beginning of 2022, uptake was around 35%, which is far lower than any of us wanted or expected. And we looked into this and tried to understand why. And of course, you know, there's lots of different factors, but some of the primary obstacles were fear. You know, people were terrified at what they might find. There's a lot of nihilistic perceptions around lung cancer. It's considered to be kind of an instant death sentence, and particularly within the communities where the programmes first were, they were quite highly deprived communities, so there was very high incidence of lung cancer rates, so they'd probably already gone through it, seen a family member die of it, so, you know, real kind of negative attitude towards it. And there's so much. So there's still this belief that, you know, you get it and nothing can be done. A lot of people don't know you can have surgery on your lungs, or if you can, that it's not going to have a huge impact on your quality of life. So, you know, fear was a big blockage, but so was apathy. You know, mentioned before, both Jeff and Joe had no symptoms. And because people are well and they don't have symptoms, they're not coughing badly, they're not getting out of breath, coughing up blood. Maybe they haven't smoked for years, so they think they don't need the check, or there's just no rush to go for that appointment. Life takes over and you forget about it. So yeah, so we were in a position where only 35% of people were coming along. So we started working in partnership with the NHS, and they asked us as a charity to create an awareness campaign to help drive that uptake. So next slide, please. So I've got, I was going to show a video, but I can send out the link to it so people can see it. But the campaign ultimately looked to address kind of these key obstacles. So highlighting that you may not have symptoms, you may have quit smoking a long time ago, and ultimately the positive outcomes that can come from having that earlier diagnosis. The campaign launched last March. And all the programs have access to these assets, the videos, the case studies, the social graphics, you know, all to kind of create this synergy and create a much more kind of universal approach to how we talk about lung health checks and screening. You know, we're not taking full credit, but I like to think we've helped and we've played a part. Next slide, please. So we've now seen uptake go up to 44%. So as of the end of last year, over 1.3 million invites had been sent. Nearly 600,000 people had attended their initial appointment. And yeah, if my maths is right, you know, I said I don't like numbers, but I think that equates to about 44%. So still room for improvement, and we've got a second campaign in the making. And also, you know, as the programme is rolled out further, you know, and I think the sooner we can officially rename it as screening, and it becomes much more commonplace, we'll see that go up again and again and again. And even then, it's, you know, it's not job done. As with all screening programmes, there is a criteria, so not everyone is eligible. We want to see the research that can potentially, well, we're starting to see research that could potentially expand that criteria. We actually funded a project ourselves a couple of years ago to look into about screening Hodgkin's lymphoma survivors. So lung cancer is actually one of the leading causes of death within Hodgkin lymphoma. It was a relatively small study done out of the Christie, about 100 people, and we found 2 lung cancers, and one of them sadly was late stage, but one of them was early, and it was small cell lung cancer, which is actually the more aggressive type of lung cancer. And this is Tim. Next slide, please. So yeah, so Tim was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 23. Thankfully he survived, and then he took part in this study because he wanted to help the Christie, because it had helped him with his original diagnosis all those years ago. And yeah, no symptoms, but small cell lung cancer, and the research, because of the results, it's now received further funding, and, you know, potentially there's now discussions ongoing about maybe expanding that criteria. So it's, you know, constantly evolving. There's lots of other risk factors, you know, air pollution with lung cancer, air pollution, occupational exposure, which obviously Erwin Mitchell is fully aware of. So we see this as kind of initial programme, a starting point, something to build on and ultimately help as many people as possible. Final slide. And just see more people like Jeff and Joe live through lung cancer than die of it. So that's why screening is so important, and I'm going to hand over to Morgan now, who is going to talk about how it's being implemented.
Hi, thank you, Julie and Rachel. Really interesting to hear from other aspects with screening. So hi everyone, my name is Morgan. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I'm Head of Nursing for Targeted Lung Health Checks at InHealth, and I'm really pleased to be talking to you today about how we have implemented our national screening programme. So I'll just give you a quick brief overview. Here at InHealth, our Targeted Lung Health Check programme is founded upon NHS England's Targeted Lung Cancer Screening programme. People aged between 55 to 74 who have ever smoked are invited to attend a free lung health check. The lung health check involves collecting information about respiratory health, lifestyle, family and medical history. And following the lung health check, people assessed as at high risk of developing lung cancer are offered a low-dose CT scan. Our TLH screening assessment is a 2-step process. Firstly, all eligible participants will undergo a telephone triage with a patient care advisor from our bookings team who will complete the health screening questionnaire. This is based upon the results of the Liverpool Lung Project and the prostate, lung, colorectal and ovarian trial, and this generates a risk score. Both phases of the 2-step patient triage process are supported by Spectra Lung, and this is our registered medical device which provides a patient database with the ability to calculate the LLP and the PLCO risk scores, and it also manages the entire patient pathway. The software supports participant administration, it's reliable, and it delivers a consistent process which facilitates recall, governance, audit, and evaluation. There are some regional variations across our programmes, but mostly our service runs for a set number of days a month, including weekends between 8 AM and 8 PM from a community screening location. And the programme contributes to the overall NHS long-term plan, Early Diagnosis of Cancer Ambition, stating that by 2028, the proportion of cancers diagnosed at stage 1 and 2 will rise to 3/4 of all cancer patients. Next slide, please. So this slide really shows our breadth of experience with screening programmes. We've developed an extensive knowledge base of service delivery. As you can see, our diabetic screening eye service, a breast screening service, and AAA. The most common theme throughout all of our screening services is our higher than average uptake rates. And this is something we put extensive work into here at InHealth, and this theme has continued into our lung screening, and we are the largest single provider of TLHC services currently. So next slide, please. We have seen over 1.1 million patients so far, have 20 live programmes nationally, and we have 9 CT mobile unit scanners. But I think the most important figure of them all is that we find at least 2 lung cancers every single day across our programmes. Slide 4, please. So this shows our programmes that we have our current uptake rates. And as you can see, these numbers are consistently high. If you could just flag those numbers up for me, please, Donna. We achieve this by pulling on our experience from other screening modalities with our tried and tested methods, and this enables us to reach as many patients as possible. Thank you. Next slide. So the next slide will just run over briefly how our screening pathway works from start to finish in a bit more detail. So the start of the patient journey begins with a data extraction from primary care networks. And these PCNs are made up of a group of GPs. The data extraction can range from a small patient numbers to large patient cohorts. This can sometimes be in the thousands. The majority of TLHC programmes adopt a deprivation first invite strategy, and that really helps impact on the health inequalities that we can see. We source data for all 55 to 74-year-olds, those who have ever smoked are prioritised, and those who don't have a smoking history on record are sent down the open invite process, meaning they can opt in, as we do know that sometimes the records aren't 100% accurate and things change. So the data extraction process is usually done before the programme goes live to ensure the programme runs as smoothly as possible. And once we have the data, it's uploaded to Spectra, and the patient pathway within TLHC can then begin, as per this slide. So invitation letters are sent out by our bookings team, first giving a 2-week notice period that our patient care advisor team will be in touch for telephone triage. Text reminders are then sent before the telephone triage at 72 hours and at 24 hours before. And since 2019, InHealth has played a key role in both delivering TLHC services and supporting local and national commissioners to develop innovative approaches to improve the service. We've supported the introduction of new approaches such as trialling telephone triage appointments led by administrator instead of a nurse-led risk assessment. And not only did this free up clinical resource, but it also really streamlined the process and improved our uptake rates. The triage model is a vital part of the TLHC pathway. A list of screening questions is asked, which help the PCAs identify if the patient is high or low risk. The high-risk patients are then invited to a nurse appointment at one of our mobile locations, and low-risk patients are safety netted and brought back in 24 months' time. So in collaboration with our national commissioners, InHealth decided to implement the lung health check programmes through mostly in-person nurse appointments, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has so many clinical benefits. However, in situations where face-to-face nurse appointments are not possible, InHealth devised an alternative workflow enabling patients to undergo their nursing appointments virtually. So during our face-to-face nurse appointment, our healthcare assistant will take a height and the weight of a patient to confirm accuracy and just support our IRMA regulations. So just making sure the radiographers have everything they need for a successful CT scan. A respiratory trained nurse will go through the assessment and confirm the answers captured at the time of the telephone triage. And the nurse will also assess general health, breathing, overall lung health, smoking history, and any other potential symptoms or red flags that the patient may be experiencing. So this is a great opportunity as well for the patient to ask any questions, any anxieties they want to discuss. This is perfect. And depending on regional guidelines, we may offer a spirometry test, and all patients who are current smokers or have recently stopped smoking will be offered smoking cessation advice and an onward referral to our partner local services. If the nurse confirms the patient's high-risk status, they'll be referred for a CT scan in the unit next door, so right there and then. And this really helps our DNA rates. It helps people not drop out or be put off by the process, and helps any anxieties that someone can assist them in there. If it's a virtual appointment, then the patient will be invited to attend a scanner that is local to them. Once the patient is scanned, the images are transferred from the mobile unit. They are read and reported via AI and a radiologist within 48 to 72 hours of scanning. The imaging is transferred to the local hospital and pulls directly back to our Spectra device, and the results are then ready to be processed. The results are graded and divided into several categories: no problems found, referral to your GP, some further CT surveillance within InHealth, or for anything else that may appear to be potentially concerning or need further investigation, a follow-up at your local hospital may be required. And we support this process. One of our senior nurses in each programme works collaboratively with the clinical team at the hospital and will identify which patients need to be discussed at the MDT on a weekly basis, and correspondence is then shared and processed accordingly. To support this, we've put in place a dedicated inbound phone line for each programme, where a patient care advisor can help advise with any queries or refer to one of our nursing team if needed. So really putting that support in for the patients as well, making sure all communication is clear at all times. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick picture of what our mobile scanners look like. If you're attending an appointment, then this is what you can look out for and expect to see. Hopefully you can't miss them. They are quite big, but apparently some people still do. But we do try and make these mobile units as accessible as possible. They can be in a variety of places: local hospitals, supermarkets, local community car parks. I know they're in golf club car parks. They're all over, so really accessible for people. And next slide, please. And I just wanted to touch on incidental findings as well. Of course, our main aim in the targeted lung health check is to identify early stage lung cancers. But as you can see, we also pick up a number of other findings, and it's just making it a really beneficial process for the patient, allowing them further insight and autonomy with their health as well. Next slide, please. And this is just some messages where we're working collaboratively with the NHS, really highlighting the importance of lung screening. And that has been mentioned and highlighted by Julie and Rachel earlier as well. Just it's so important not to be put off or be apathetic about it. There's some really good work going on there. Yeah, and we look forward to seeing people at our lung health checks and starting their journey with us. Thank you very much for listening.
So just a reminder, if anybody's got any questions, I don't think we've got any questions at the moment, but if anybody wants to raise any questions for any of us, please pop them in the Q&A. But thank you both to Morgan and Rachel for your questions. Oh, we've got a question coming in now. Let me just pull that up. Sorry, I've lost it. Oh, here we go. Question for Rachel. How can awareness of lung cancer screening programs be increased and people supported to attend?
Great question. Yeah, I think awareness is absolutely key, and I think part of the problem we have is because it's not national yet, that there still isn't necessarily the awareness and understanding and recognition of programs such as the existing programs like breast, bowel and cervical screening, to remember them there. So yeah, I mean, it's we as a charity are constantly talking about that. We're out in the community where these checks are happening, identifying people who are eligible, and encouraging them to go. We're doing a lot of online targeted social media advertising. There's a lot of out-of-home advertising, and ultimately the key is just to keep talking about it and keep making it as visible as possible. I'm a marketeer, and the rule of thumb we have is someone needs to see something 7 times before they act on it. So it's just absolutely vital that we keep drip feeding those messages, and particularly for the reasons I shared why people might not. And you know, like Julia, I got my cervical cancer screening letter, and I'm like, I know how important that is to go, but then I get an email or the kids shout me and I need to cook tea, and all of a sudden that letter has been completely forgotten about, not because I don't think it's important, but because life just takes over. So we have to make sure that we are trying to constantly communicate that these programs are available, and make sure those messages are just kind of on repeat.
And I had in my journey, I mentioned to Morgan that I had an incidental finding actually from one of my MRI scans with some lung nodules. So they are now being followed up. I've had a couple of CT scans in a mobile scanner, and actually both of those appointments have been at sort of 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning. So it just goes to show, you know, the extra people that we're getting through the system by having those what we would perceive to be out of hours appointments as well. So really great partnership and just increasing that scanning capacity, I think. Presumably, Morgan, that's the whole idea, really, just utilising the space and the time.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. I mean, I know we are targeting a specific age group, 55 to 74, but people have their own lives, people have got their own commitments, people are, you know, working all the way up to, you know, much older than that now. And it has to be flexible. It has to be about patient choice, and it has to be what suits people. And that, you know, that mustn't be a reason to be put off coming to your lung scan.
Yeah. Another question for you, Morgan. Are there any plans for targeted lung health checks to be formally expanded to other lung conditions, for example, the incidental findings related to lung health?
Well, we do lots of partnership working and follow-ups. So obviously I did mention about spirometry, so anybody that isn't diagnosed formally with emphysema already. So we are picking up lots of findings with undiagnosed emphysema. I used to be an A&E nurse. I know the massive pressures of how much undiagnosed respiratory conditions present in A&E, the winter pressures, you know, especially after COVID. I think anyone who's been anywhere near a hospital lately, it's very, very, very busy. So anything that we are really picking up so many patients there, you know, it's just, and that's the benefit of having our face-to-face assessment as well. It's assessing those patients, having the clinical skills to see that, and making the onward referrals in the community. So of course, as well, we continue to screen for lung nodules. We keep surveillance on those. Anything else in the future, I'm not sure. I guess we have to wait and see what happens when it turns official and it does officially go to a screening program. But we are really putting in a lot of work with lots of the incidental findings in the background at the moment.
Thank you. I don't think there are any more questions. Oh, hold on a minute. Here we go. Will you be involved in the new blood test trial that's coming soon? As per the article on the cover of the Metro today, it will be a blood test that predicts cancer up to 7 years early. Yes, I read that as well. Very interesting.
There are a few. I do know there are quite a lot of clinical trials going on at the moment. You know, the targeted lung health check is not the only clinical trial that's currently you know, looking at lung screening and the benefits. There are a few other clinical trials at the moment involving blood tests, epithelial cells, and things like that. I probably won't comment too much more on them. We're not involved with that. We're just continuing with our low dose CT scans at the moment. And I don't know if any results have been published for any other trials at the moment. So I guess we just need to watch the space of what might come out in the future.
I think it's just so exciting that all these things are happening, isn't it? Because it's all just showing progress, and
Massively.
you know, some of the blood trials that obviously we're not involved in, but are aware of. Again, they maybe work better for some cancers than lung potentially, but I think the ultimately the fact that this research is being done, these clinical trials are happening, you know, as many ways as we can try and get ahead of lung cancer, and every cancer is only a good thing.
Well, thank you both, Morgan and Rachel. I hope that was informative for everybody. And thank you all for your time, and good evening. Hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.